Greetings, everybody. It's Jim. When it comes to the Fate Adversary Toolkit, it's easy to assume, whether you're looking at it online or just passing it by at your local game shop, that this book is all about writing compelling villains for your campaign. And I'm not saying it doesn't help you with that. It absolutely does. After all, it is what the title and the cover kind of suggest, right? But what if I told you this book had 10 times that power? I mean, if you were interested before, now your eyes have got to be wide open. So today I'm going to be sharing with you about why you should be using the Fate Adversary Toolkit from Evil Hat Productions. Now, the Fate Adversary Toolkit starts off by talking about the most quintessential part of any campaign about getting into your character's faces, and that is, of course, enemies, right? Now, the Fate Adversary Toolkit talks about 4 different types of enemies, and most game masters are going to look at this and be like, well, yeah, I know this stuff already. But at the same time, one thing that Evil Hat Production does be better than anybody else I've ever seen in the industry is teach people how to play a game. Now, this doesn't mean that you're going to read forever. If you're an experienced game master, you can pretty much get through it and understand it because they have a way of being concise with stuff, packing a lot of stuff in a lot of few words. It's really good how they do it, and a lot of gamer companies could learn from them on this. But anyway, going back to this, talking about being concise, let's get back to the subject. Okay, so there's 4 types. There's threats, which are the ones that soak up the hits, right? They are the tanks, if you will. And enemies, by the way, are the ones that you can punch. That's what it says in the book. You can physically take care of them, all right? That's the idea. So the threat is the one that's always there, hard to get rid of, but yet they just kind of pelt you at the same time. They're not there. They're just always ever present. All right. And then you have the hitters, which is kind of the polar opposite. They deal much more damage, but they can flitter away if they're taken care of correctly. And another set of polar opposites, of course, are fillers, which are basically minions. If you play D&D, you know that in 4th edition, they brought out something called the minion, which could do damage to you. But if you hit them even for 1 hit point, they were gone. It didn't matter. You didn't have to track it. Boom, 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 they're gone. And these are the guys that are like the Foot Clan and Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Stormtroopers, and Star Wars. You get the idea. And of course, the polar opposite of that is the bosses. These are the ones who are going to have the skills. They're going to be tougher to take care of. They may get away and go away and come back again. They may concede and just admit defeat, run away, and then you'll have another set of minions and hitters and tanks to deal with. So all these things are pretty basic, I know, but that's just the first part of this book. Now, this next grouping of adversaries is really going to seem familiar to anybody who's played an old school style fantasy role-playing game. Of course, we're talking about obstacles. All right, you can't punch it, you can't hit it with a sword. You either got to deal with it or avoid it. That's just about all there is to it. So there's 3 types of obstacles. The first is the hazard. This would be like a fire pit or jumping over a chasm. Okay, it can definitely do damage to you, but basically, you can avoid it if you can. The next is a block. Okay, it's just something that gets in the way. This would be the equivalent of a big boulder in front of a cave entrance to a dungeon. Simple. And the final one is a distraction. Now, this isn't really something that it necessarily has to be tangible. It can be simply an idea. This stereotypical one is like Superman. He wants to take care of Lex Luthor, but of course Lex Luthor's got a bus full of kids hanging off a bridge somewhere. I think they did that in Spider-Man too. It's a very popular theme, but that is a distraction. What are you going to take care of? You want to go here, but something's compelling you to go over there. And speaking of compels, that probably is what happened with an obstacle or two. An obstacle or two. Now, this last adversary group is quite formidable, but it has to be combined with the other 2 previous adversary groups to be effective, okay? And these are called constraints. All right, their objective is to make nothing more than your characters' lives that much more horrible. Okay, they do add a lot of flavor though. So where once you were going after Mordok the evil warlord, well, now there's a constraint called a countdown, which now you don't just have to defeat him, you got to defeat him by midnight, or some elder god gets released into the ether, right? Something like that. So that's a countdown, and that even makes things like going up against stormtroopers or the Foot Clan and Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles more interesting. Yeah, your characters can pretty much whisk right through them all day long, but now they only got 6 turns, right? That makes it much more interesting. What can they do? Maybe they'll have to release some of their special powers or things they were saving up for the boss or that, and try to take care of that. It might be a temptation to do so. Another thing is a limitation. That's another constraint. For instance, if you ever seen James Bond, there's one called Moonraker. Well, he might want to take care of a guard or something on the Moonraker station. It's a freaking space station. Guns are pretty much not the greatest idea in the world to use. So a limitation. While he's a good shot with a gun, now what's he going to do? Now, the last constraint is called a resistance, and it's easy enough to understand. I mean, two cops go in to foil a bank robbery, but the bank robbers, lo and behold, have full body armor on, so the bullets are just bouncing off them. They're impervious to it. So now what are the cops going to do? So basically, those are the ideas behind constraints. The next thing they talk about is how to use the adversaries to spice up your zones. Okay. Now, we all know that zones can have aspects, but at the same time, you really want to do everything you can to make sure that your warehouse doesn't feel like a parking lot outside, right? So, some things that could be adversaries as well as an aspect, there's something like crates. That would definitely be a block, or a smashing metal recycler. That could be a block as well as a hazard. It all depends on where your characters have to go. So they have a few pages dedicated just for that. Now, this last section is going to have more value to you the more inexperienced you are at game mastering, okay? And this is the Rogues Gallery. Basically, everything in the book that I've taught you so far is in the first 34 pages of the book, okay? Just that small little bit is this is the gold of the book, okay? And the book's only $15, so it's worth getting, yes, just for these 34 pages. That's fine. Experienced game masters can go right ahead and say, okay, I'm going to get my worth out of this. But the Rogues Gallery is really nice too if you're inexperienced. I can see where this would come in. What it is an example of a whole bunch of the most popular genres of role playing, whether it be fantasy, science fiction, 1980s action, 1940s noir, horror, you name it, it's in there. And basically, what it does is give you an example of every type of adversary, whether it be an enemy, an obstacle, or a constraint in them. So that is really worth it. And yeah, it does take up 70 pages to go through all that, but they do it in depth and they show you how they go about making these adversaries for you. And so it gets some of your work done a little bit. So that's pretty nice. So the last question that comes up, and I think I've already answered this a few seconds ago, is the book worth getting? Well, the thing is, the first 34 pages, as I mentioned, any game master would want to get. I mean, that's just it. Even if we know this stuff already, it is good to have a reference to see how Fate handles these things and just kind of go over these things every so often, just to refresh our memory. Maybe we're being too enemy heavy or too obstacle heavy. It's like, oh yeah, I haven't thought of using a countdown lately. It's nice to have. Now, part of me seems like this is actually quite fundamental, though, these 34 pages. And part of me would like to see that in the main core rule book, just as a guy who likes conciseness, all in one book, kind of compendium kind of thing. But at the same time, I do understand that the guys the Evil Hat are very good at teaching games, and having this as a separate book is probably good. You probably don't absolutely need it in the main Fate rulebook, but this will be something good. So when new people get into it, but then again, new people get into it with the condensed version, right? That's only like 100 pages or so, without all the fluff in the main book, right? So I don't know. Now maybe it could have these 32, but that's not happening here or there anyway for any time soon. So that's okay. It's a moot point. Just my rambling thoughts. But at $15, I mean, even if you're a completionist and you got $15 to spare, all signs point to yes on that too. So in overall, yes, you definitely should be getting the Fate Adversary Toolkit. And thank you for seeing the video. Please like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.